Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome an accomplished leader and an entrepreneur in the world of healthcare from Florida, USA, Nancy May. Nancy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me here, Ashutosh.
Thank you. Nancy is the founder of CareManity. She's an author and a podcast host, which is elder success and she's also a top-rated governance expert who's gone from the boardroom to the emergency room. So, Nancy, we're going to talk about governance in one part and the aging care industry on the other part. But before we start, tell me about your own amazing journey from the boardroom to the emergency room.
Oh, I have spent 30 plus years working with public companies and boards of directors and coaching those in the latter part of that in how to get on their first public company compensated board.
Mm.
It's an interesting journey that many people do not know how to get there. And it takes thoughtful strategy and time and consideration in doing so in a different mindset. But in the course of time, I say, my parents prepared me for their death since I was 5, making sure that I, as the oldest daughter and oldest child, would make sure that I was comfortable and knew what to do when, in fact, it was their time to get some support from me. And that happened. And what ensued was I found that my parents had a financial advisor that was misguiding them. They had doctors that were misdiagnosing and not taking care of them. They had moved into a care facility that they wanted to go into, not that I necessarily wanted them to go into, but they wanted to go into, which was a lovely place. But the cost of their care, it increased to over $360,000 a year. US dollars. Yeah. So it was over $30,000 a month. And the quality of care was pretty poor. I had before and after pictures. If I had left my parents there or stay there, they would have been dead within 6 months. I ended up right-siding the financial situation. It took about a year and almost daily conversations with my financial to unravel the mess, some of which we got, some of which we couldn't because of how it had been set up. But I saved them over $260,000 a year, extended the quality and their lives in general by about 10 years. And at the end, I say, all was done well, to the best of my ability. And that's life. You want life to end well, right? Absolutely. For not just for yourself, but for those that care about you as well.
Well said. What an amazing story. Thank you for sharing this. So, Nancy, let's talk about governance. So that's the first part of your avatar as a corporate leader. My first question, and I've often asked this from leaders, and I've sat on so many boards myself, what are some of the most common challenges you see boards facing today?
Oh, I would say some of the biggest common challenges are the right people on the board for the right reason.
Yeah.
Not changing them out when they should be done. And the same goes with senior management, not getting rid of a CEO when in fact they have become comfortable in their role and the company is no longer in a good, solid, competitive, strength situation that they should be. We get comfortable. I think lack of action is probably the biggest governance challenge that we have out there.
Well said. And what can boards do to and there's always a big debate on independent versus non-independent, executive versus non-executive. I'll come to that in a while, but how can boards improve their own effectiveness and decision-making process?
Oh, boards really need to stay, I would say, in the game is probably the best way to say it, to really not just understand the business that they're overseeing, but also understanding the subtleties and the nuances that are impacting the businesses, and not doing the work for the CEO, which is the job anyway. There should be over there to make sure that the boards can, or the CEO can see the subtleties of what need to be done without actually doing it for them. But I
Mm,
think the biggest challenge really is when a director doesn't know when it's time for them to go.
mm, mm.
And I come back to our original conversation, is changing out the boards for the right reason at the right time.
Correct.
Technology is having such an impact on
Yeah.
companies today. And there are few of us who really understand where that's going to go.
Mm,
And just being aware of it, not being too safe sometimes
mm,
goes a long way too,
mm.
because without a little fear in your heart, you're going to go nowhere.
Correct. 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 And since you raised technology, that gives me a segue to my next question. What, in your view, has been the impact of technology on board governance and board operations?
Oh, well, the way the boards operate changes at such a slow pace. If
Mm,
you look back 30 years, there's, well, some people would say there's been a lot of change, but in reality, there really hasn't been a lot of change.
mm,
I would say the biggest impact on technology is really understanding how the markets have shifted, and the powers that happen with trading, and the amount of information that outside investors really have
mm,
to dig into what's happening inside of a company so that they can challenge the true ability for a company to produce
mm,
returns for the investors.
mm,
I think the real strength has been on the investor side of the market, less so in the boardroom itself.
mm. Well said. There is another aspect that has come into the forefront in the last 10, 12 years, more particularly after the 17 SDGs came into play, which is diversity and equity.
Mhm.
I wanted to get your perspective on what role does diversity play in the effectiveness of a board, and you've sat on many boards, and how can companies ensure they are fostering diverse boards?
Well, the easy part is saying, fostering diverse boards. If you look out there, there are two genders. It's pretty easy to see that part. But
Mm,
then there's that cultural aspect. And, it- I believe that diversity is important, but diversity for diversity's sake alone is not necessarily adding value to a company or to a board. It's
mm,
really understanding the impact that that individual, from their background, it could be, where their upbringing was, but also their education, their knowledge, their strength, their business strength, and
mm,
how that can really make a company more robust and aggressive in the marketplace, so that you just don't have a bunch of cookie cutter people on a board. And
mm,
that's a very comfortable thing for people to do, because we naturally gravitate to people and things that are like us,
mm,
right?
mm.
We're afraid of things that we don't know about.
Absolutely.
So, like I said, having a little fear in that gut goes a long way by helping us learn more.
Well said. But the other question, Nancy, I've often asked a lot of women leaders I've spoken to is that you have now a seat at the table, but is your voice being heard? And more often than not, the response I get is not really. I'd love to get your perspective, but that's also an important part of diversity.
Yeah, I would agree. It really depends upon the individuals at the table.
Correct.
Years back, I had a rather interesting experience, and I'll share this because I think it perfectly pictures what you're talking about. I was attending a meeting that I was invited to by a mentor,
Mm,
and it was myself and actually four other very well-known, powerful CEOs
mm,
that were talking. Me, one female in the conversation.
mm,
And one of the gentlemen um, slowly started to try and physically elbow me out of the conversation.
mm,
And I felt what was going on physically. I could see what was going on. And one gentleman, who happened to be Larry Bossidy, CEO at Allied Signal at the time, reached his hand and said, just gently pulled me back into the conversation,
mhm.
physically pulled me back into the conversation.
You see.
And then he looked at me and said, hi,
Mm,
hand out, Bossidy, Larry Bossidy, who are you?
mm,
And see, that was, in my experience, that was a person who was a leader who
correct.
understood not just intellectually what was going on, but physically and what was impacting it. So in that case, I had a voice at the table, but you're right. People are physically making moves to make sure that somebody that they don't know or are afraid of really um, does not have the conversation at the table.
Great response. Thank you. My next question is on independent directors.
Mhm.
And I know in India, for example, in the last 5 or 7 years, the responsibilities of an independent director are the same as that of an executive director. So I've stopped accepting a non-executive role because I said I don't want fiduciary responsibility. I'd love your perspective on the importance of independent or non-executive directors on boards.
I think it's very important.
Mhm.
You don't have the same kind of relationship with the company. You're not employed by them as an employee,
Yeah.
and you do have your role, your fiduciary role is stronger in that perspective. So I think it's critical. In fact, I don't believe that necessarily the CEO should be listed as chairman of the board. I think there should be a total separation.
Yeah.
I was just looking at a company earlier this morning before we had a conversation where the CEO, who's a relatively new CEO to a fairly good size international company, several billion dollars, he is also on the nominating committee. I think that's wrong, absolutely wrong from a governance perspective.
Correct. Correct.
So we really have to look at truly what the independence means in the boardroom, I think, as well.
Well said. One more question related to governance, and then we'll move to aging care. One of the responsibilities boards are often tasked with is to oversee organizational culture.
Mhm.
And culture to me is really the way we do things here. I'd love to get your perspective on how can boards ensure they are overseeing an effective corporate culture.
I would that's the 800-pound gorilla. I think boards really have very little ability to make an impact on the culture of a company.
Mm-hmm.
The culture of a company is driven from the top down and the bottom up. If a CEO is rules with an iron fist and my way or the highway, that's going to drive the culture down from the top, and the bottom up is going to say, we'll think about that at another company. There's only so much.
Yeah.
So we all know that a leader doesn't lead from the front. They really need to lead from the back and the middle, where understanding that and the way the boards can really have an impact on culture is making sure you've got the right CEO in there for the right reason at the right time. And again, you see the CEO and his or her management team from a very different perspective than the employees do. It's important to really see what's happening, have an inside ombudsman who you can trust, and people who are going to give you a real insider's perspective. One of the best ways to do that is through understanding where people are going when they leave a company and why.
Yeah.
And also understanding what are the stressors that are impacting that particular culture at the time. And that's sort of a perfect lead into what's happening in the aging care market, because a lot of people are working in the workforce and overly stressed
Very well
by
said.
taking care of aging parents. And a good manager who's overstressed in taking care of an aging parent or a loved one and doesn't have an outlet for themselves can become a bad manager, and people leave.
But kind of moving to the care, Nancy, you mentioned right in the beginning, you told us the story about your parents and how you were able to help them move out of that facility. But what is it that motivated you to almost pivot from the corporate world to giving your time to the aging care industry? What is it that you saw your incredible experience could bring to this industry?
Oh, well, what I did is I looked at the aging care business really as a business. And those of us who are family members don't understand how big this business is,
Correct.
and that we are not necessarily the customers of the business. We are as I say, a necessary evil of the business. Without us, they don't get paid. They don't get paid by Medicare. They don't get paid by Medicaid, at least here in the States. They don't get paid by government insurers elsewhere. So understanding that the importance of having I'll be crass about it, a dying elderly parent is critical to their success. So, there was a movie here in the States that was called Network many years ago, and the guy was famous for yelling out the window in New York saying, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. Well, that's kind of where I saw was everything that was hitting my parents, who were smart, talented entrepreneurs and business professionals themselves, just hit every rung going down that ladder, and no fault of their own. It's just they became victims. And so many people that I see doing that as well. And it's a sad state. Sooner or later, we're going to get there this house ourselves, and I'll be damned if it's going to happen to me. I'm going to fight like hell I can make sure it doesn't happen. So I guess a little bit it was, self-preservation as well as just being so discouraged with how it's evolved over the years.
Correct.
Yeah.
So therefore, my next question is that how can caregivers protect their elderly family members from financial and emotional distress? And you, of course, not only supported your parents, but you also looked at it as a business and now fully invested in it.
Yeah. Well, if we're talking about making sure our parents don't become victims or supporting them, it really starts with early conversation, very early on, with your children as parents, with you as adults and adult children of your parents, and making sure that there's a comfortable communication both on physical, financial assets and needs, and wishes and desires. Because sometimes money is not necessarily the issue. It's the concern about how do you want to live?
Right.
What happens when that final decision to go or no go happens? Or what do you really want? So understanding and being comfortable talking about it, not as a be all and end all, but just a gentle understanding and conversation to say, geez, have you ever thought about this? Because this is what I want.
Yeah. Well
Both
said.
ways.
Well said. And what would you say are some of the critical elements of a successful or a good aging care plan?
Oh, I am a big advocate of looking at the care and well-being of mom and dad really as the business of Mom and Dad Inc. If you understand that taking care of an aging parent or a loved one, whoever it is, even your children, right, is very similar to running a small, highly complex enterprise. You have financial situations, you have hard assets, you have soft assets, you have customers being the person who needs the care or support, you have vendors, which are the other caregivers to support people, you have providers, you have service providers, which is the aging care or the healthcare system. And understanding how that all works together is truly like running a highly complex small enterprise. And the outcome of that enterprise really should be a success. Is it profitable? Is it health and well-being? What is the ultimate goal and strategy to achieve that? So thinking about it that way is kind of very impersonal. But if you can do that, then the personal aspect does not rule the outcome that you're looking for.
Right. And what would you say are some effective ways to improve the quality of life of the elderly?
Compassion, empathy. It's really listening, understanding, and especially those who might have dementia or Alzheimer's or other kind of cognitive impairment, understand that this is not happening to you, it's happening to them. So perspective goes a long way in really making the quality of life good for them. and having fun, being creative, playing with it a little bit. It doesn't have to be serious every day.
Mhm.
You can have a blast. You can have fun in the simple moments
Mm.
and celebrate every day, because every
Mm.
day can be a good day.
Correct. And yet, there is also the perspective of the caregiver. And I
Mm.
remember when my parents were aging, their doctor would always tell me that you have got to look after yourself as much as you look after your parents because you are the caregiver. So I want to get your thoughts on how can caregivers balance their own responsibilities while taking care of their own well-being?
That is a comment, taking care of the caregiver, that I hear all the time. It is a very difficult thing to do.
Mm.
Um, I would say that the biggest kind of care you can give yourself is emotional care.
Mm.
Knowing that you need a break, some time to yourself. Um, I'm I I'm kind of obsessive about things that I'm focused on. Those who are A+ personalities, although I never considered myself an A-type personality, although I should say a couple of people tell me that I am. It's like, well,
Mm.
I guess it takes one to know one.
Absolutely.
So, but I found that when I was really stressed out, that getting some hard physical exercise and activity, I have a rowing machine, I'd sit on that and just row it out, just work it out. And um, spending some time to yourself
Mm.
is important. Your parents don't need you every single waking
Yes.
moment. To
Yes.
micromanage them is not good for them. It's not good for you.
That's it. And my last question for you, Nancy. Like I asked you about technology for governance, um, I see a lot of technology being used in aging care facilities in India.
Mhm.
I'd love to get your thoughts on how can technology be leveraged to enhance aging care.
I think there's amazing things that are happening with technology and aging care, from simple things like trip monitors when somebody might be falling. But I have to laugh because one of the first, I wouldn't quite call it technology, but my mom had a tendency to escape, I call it. She was
Mm.
an escape artist from
Mm.
a different facility we had
Mm.
moved my mom and dad to from the first one. And an aide kept losing her. She'd walk out down the apartment, down the hall. It's like, where's mom? It's like, all right, so how are we going to fix this? And I was at a mall where we lived up in Connecticut at the time,
Mm.
and in one of those as seen on TV stores. And there's this little plastic bird. It looked like a Disney animated bird, and you walk by it and it would chirp. And I thought, there's my first use of technology. So we
And,
put the bird by the door, and as soon as the bird chirped, we knew that mom was walking out the door. It
mm.
wasn't a lot of technology at the time,
Yeah, but it was the
but
beginning. Mm.
so it doesn't need to be fancy
Yeah.
technology. It can be really very simple. But
Mm.
heart monitors, there's so much in there to
Mm.
extend the quality of life, not just life itself, but quality of life, I think is important. And that's key. And then sometimes like I said, it doesn't need to be fancy. It can just have a battery, and that's all you need, right? Versus generative AI technology that's creating a robot. I still think that human touch is so important
Mm.
to who we are as
Absolutely.
living human breathing
Mm.
creatures.
Well said. And on that note, Nancy, I just want to say thank you so much for speaking to me. It has been such an amazing conversation on two incredibly diverse subjects and such, and you address them so beautifully. Governance, which is so critical in the corporate world, and as you mentioned, your 3 decades experience has been invaluable in our conversation today. I'm sure my viewers and listeners would love every bit that you spoke about governance. And the second part, which is the aging care industry, something that started with a personal experience, you are now giving back to a very, very large number of people as a business enterprise that you are developing. Good luck in everything that you're doing. Thank you for speaking to me, and all the very best.
And thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to be here with you. And I hope that the Elder Care Success podcast is good for everybody else too.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you for listening to the brand called You Videocast and Podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.